Hello respected viewers, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is about President Putin's lesson on the Second World War. He had a 10,000 word essay published in a, I think it was a German magazine a couple of weeks ago. So this is his view of the Second World War and the significance of the Soviet Union therein. And it tells us so much about his worldview, because this is almost like the foundational myth for modern Russian nationalism. Obviously, Russian nationalism goes back several centuries, but from the late 20th century onwards. Now, obviously, when I say myth, not everything here is false. Some of what he says is true, some of it is just factual, uncontroversial, but it's the contentious parts that I'm going to take issue with. So we know the Second World War was 1939 to 45, but obviously the Soviet Union was fighting from 1941. Or was it? There's that bit in September 1939 when the Soviet Union was an ally of Nazi Germany, which he overlooks, which he ignores. This unprovoked aggression against Poland, the Republic of Poland, with which the Soviet Union had normal diplomatic relations. And yes, there had been some fighting right after the First World War. It was debatable where the border between Russia should be and Poland should be. Poland coming back into being after a century, and the Russian Empire breaking up. So, you know, arguably Poland was somewhat guilty on this. There's the Katyn massacre. I must come on to that later. Now, the Russian government tries to balance this, saying, but Russian prisoners of war in Polish captivity, a lot of them died in 1919. And that's true. Some of them died of malnutrition, of lack of medical care, of wounds they'd already sustained before captured. They were captured. Was there negligence? Was there cruelty? Negligence, lightly, cruelty, some of that. Okay, Poland's partly guilty of this. But that's not comparable to the murder of 20,000 prisoners of war, and indeed some of them civilians, in 1940, Polish officers and reserve officers in Soviet captivity. But I'm diving a bit too much into the particulars already. So he said that the Soviet Union did the most to win the Second World War, and that's true. We often hear this figure bandied about: 27 million Soviets killed in the Second World War. Now, I don't know what the real figure is. I don't think anyone does. 27 million is like the highest I've ever heard. May well be an inflation, but the true figure, whatever it is high. If 20 million is about the middle estimate, might be a little bit below that. But even if it's only 20 million, only 20 million is a staggering number of people. I've not known anyone to doubt that the Soviet Union sustained more deaths than any other in the Second World War. So yes, they suffered unimaginably. And I don't impugn the honour of soldiers who fought valiantly. They got far more courage than I would ever have done. Their hardihood, their immense sacrifice, and all the rest of it. It was just really, really beyond words what they went through. But only 50% of that credit goes to Russia. Only 50% of them were Russian, but he tries to claim all the credit. Now, yes, it's true he invites other former Soviet republics to his parades, but overlooking that obviously the Soviet Union had aggressed some other countries in the run-up to this. You know, Belarus suffered proportionally more than Russia. Ukraine suffered proportionally more than Russia. I'm not saying that makes them more valiant, less valiant. They just happen to be the path of the Wehrmacht. So really, per head, they did more, or at least suffered more. Now, perhaps it would almost seem silly to say some nations are braver than others. Bravery is really an individual thing. I'm not remotely brave. But, you know, Ukraine, were they invited? I don't think so. All right, they wouldn't have gone. Was Georgia invited? I don't think so. Part of their territory is under illegal Russian occupation. Likewise with Ukraine. So, as I say, Putin blames Western countries, France and the UK, for not forming an alliance with the Soviet Union before the Second World War. Well, part of that is a lie, because in March 1936, France did form a military alliance with the Soviet Union. It was very tendentious, and many French right-wingers objected to it, but they did form a military alliance. And if France was so evil, being a capitalist democracy, surely the Soviet Union shouldn't have formed such an alliance. So, other ways that the Soviet Union actively assisted the Third Reich was granting Basis Nord, this naval base, to the German Kriegsmarine in the extreme north of the Soviet Union, near Murmansk. There was, after the defeat of Poland, there was a pact of friendship between the Soviet Union and the Germans. So they shared the spoils. The NKVD and Gestapo met, exchanged information, helped each other. So, sorry, a lot of what he's saying is bogus. It's an absolute stinking lie. The Soviet Union actively helped Nazi Germany during the Second World War up until June 1941. I don't blame all Soviets for that. The average Soviet had absolutely no say in this whatsoever. They were living under massive state terror, so there's nothing they could do, and they had very little information. What they're told is often lies. So anyway, so the inconvenient truth is the Soviet Union helped to start the war, was Germany's co-conspirator against Poland. And you say, well, what about your country? All right, my country, you want to say Republic of Ireland, United Kingdom, the British Isles as a whole? Yeah, we've done wrong too sometimes. Anyway, so by defeating Poland, the Soviet Union helped bring the Germans hundreds of kilometers further east towards Moscow. We're told that that Stalin was so perspicacious he could see the Germans were going to attack him. No, he couldn't. That's why they were kind of ill-prepared in the wrong positions in June 1941, disbelieved all reports telling him the overwhelming evidence was Germany was about to attack him, even from his own spies. So other terrible things that the Soviet government did, and I'm not blaming all Soviet people or most Soviet people. The Warsaw Uprising, 1944, that August into September, lifting not a finger to help the Polish Home Army because the Soviet government wanted the Polish Home Army to be annihilated. They didn't want the nucleus of a properly independent Poland to be there. Obviously, Stalin wanted to keep his ill-gotten gains eastern Poland after the war, and in that he succeeded. So, were Western countries to blame? Some of this is true about Sudetenland, the Munich Agreement, 1938, that September, France and the UK agreeing that Germany could take the Sudetenland. It wasn't theirs to give. I think the United Kingdom, for example, should have just said nothing, or sort of stayed out of it, not agreed, criticised it, condemned it, maybe even sanctions, but not approved of it. But it was a desperate last-ditch attempt to preserve war. Remember, France had a former military alliance with Czechoslovakia. The Czechoslovaks were thrown to the wolves. So the Czechoslovaks refused Soviet help. Why? Because they knew what an absolutely satanic tyranny the Soviet Union was, how ordinary Soviet people were treated abominably, how millions of them had been deliberately starved to death, how millions of them had been sent to slave labour camps. And I do mean millions. 50% of those sent to the labour camps had no trial whatsoever. The others a totally unfair trial. At least hundreds of thousands of people executed by the Soviet government. Most of them were totally innocent. How do we know they're innocent? Because the Soviet government said so. In the 1950s, exonerated a great number of them. So, and look what the communist government in Russia had done right after it was founded. Said, okay, you can go independent. We recognize the independence of Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, all the rest of it, the various Central Asian states, and invaded them all. So acts of outright unprovoked aggression. So anyway, there was such a hideously oppressive state, because people lived in the state of semi-slavery, that the Czechoslovaks thought, well, German occupation wouldn't be as bad as by comparison. I know that the Wehrmacht did commit genocide in Czechoslovakia, but nobody predicted that in 1938. So now the USSR voted in 1991 that the Nazi-Soviet pact was wrong. Putin said it was wrong in 2010. He now changes his mind. Yeah, so he's actually going against what the Soviet government said later, and indeed what he said later. So make your mind up, and it's okay to change your mind. But anyway, revisionism can be good if you're then telling the truth or being more moral or something like that. Or perhaps we're too moral sometimes, perhaps we're too moralistic. But he's certainly not objective. He's a historianist. He's doing it to try and exploit the Second World War for the purpose